For over 60 years, Scott's has sold Americans the same seasonal fix for their lawn. Feed it in spring, feed it again in fall, and never ask why it needs feeding at all. But in 1975, a Japanese farmer published a book proving that exact cycle was the problem, not the solution. And the method he uncovered is the reason a handful of lawns in Japan today barely get watered, never get fed, and somehow look better every year instead of worse, year after year. Here's what your lawn probably looks like right now, because odds are it's not that different from most. Circular brown patches that showed up sometime in July and have been quietly widening ever since. Kneel down, and the soil underneath doesn't feel like soil. It feels closer to packed clay or the ground under a driveway. Push a screwdriver into it, and it barely goes an inch before it stops dead. The color isn't right either. Not a healthy green, but a dull, yellow-tinted green that fades further with every mow. Water it, and instead of soaking in, it beads and runs off toward the lowest point in the yard, pooling there for hours before it finally disappears. Near the fence line, there's probably a thin ribbon of moss, because that corner never fully dries the way the rest of the yard does. And every spring, the same green Scott's bag comes out of the garage. 3 weeks of green, then the slow slide back to brown by June, right on schedule. That's not bad luck, and it isn't your fault either. That's the business model. A lawn that fixed itself would only need 1 bag, ever. Add it up over a decade, and the average homeowner spends more on Scott's products than the cost of professionally resodding the entire yard twice over, all while the grass never actually gets any healthier underneath. Masanobu Fukuoka spent decades proving something no fertilizer company wanted repeated. The more you feed soil, the more dependent it becomes, and the worse it performs the moment you stop. He wasn't a hobbyist with a theory. He trained as a plant pathologist, spent years in a lab studying crop disease, then walked away from that entire system after watching soil get sicker every time it was treated like a patient instead of left to recover on its own. By the time he wrote his findings down, most of his neighbors had already dismissed him as someone farming out of stubbornness rather than science. He never worked on lawns. He worked on rice and citrus, on a hillside most agricultural experts wrote off as a failure. But the principle he proved out there is exactly what a small number of Japanese gardeners now apply to grass, and it looks nothing like anything sold in a Scott's aisle. Which raises the obvious question, one Scott's has never wanted homeowners asking. If the answer isn't feeding the grass, what exactly replaces it, starting today? Here's the part Scott's will never put on a bag, because there's no product left to sell once you understand it. A lawn doesn't actually need nitrogen poured onto it every spring. It needs a living structure underground, fungal threads, decomposing organic matter, insects, and bacteria, all working together to hold water and release nutrients on their own schedule. Fertilizer doesn't build that structure, it bypasses it completely, force-feeding the grass directly and leaving the soil underneath exactly as lifeless as it was before. Which is exactly what Fukuoka spent 25 years proving on that hillside. He stopped tilling. He stopped applying synthetic fertilizer. He let straw, clippings, and organic waste decompose directly on the surface, season after season, instead of stripping it away and starting over every year. He called it Shizen Noho, natural farming, and wrote it down in a book called The One Straw Revolution, translated into English a few years later, though almost none of those readers ever thought to apply it to something as ordinary as a lawn. The first few years, by his own account, were close to failure. Yields dropped. Neighbors assumed he'd simply given up farming altogether. But by year 5, something the neighboring farms hadn't accounted for started happening. The soil itself changed. It held moisture longer without irrigation. It needed no outside input at all. And within a few more seasons, his yields matched, then quietly surpassed, the chemically managed fields right next to his. Applied to a lawn, the same principle looks almost embarrassingly simple. Instead of bagging grass clippings and feeding chemical nitrogen twice a year, you leave the clippings exactly where they fall, and once or twice a season, you spread a thin layer, no more than a 1/4 inch, of fine compost directly over the grass. Not buried, not tilled in, just resting on the surface, where earthworms and soil microbes slowly pull it down themselves over the following weeks. Over months, that thin layer does what a Scott's bag never could. It rebuilds the structure underneath instead of just greening the blades on top for 3 weeks at a time. The compaction that made a screwdriver stop after 1 inch starts loosening on its own, because roots and microbial life are quietly doing the work a rototiller or a bag of nitrogen never could reach. It sounds almost too simple to work, which is probably why so few people ever try it. There's no measuring, no schedule to follow, no bag to remember to buy before the weekend. Just clippings left alone and compost added twice a year instead of chemicals 4 times a year. Which raises an uncomfortable question. One worth sitting with for a moment. If this works, and works better the longer you leave it alone, why isn't it the standard everyone recommends instead? The answer has less to do with grass, and more to do with what's actually sitting inside that Scott's bag you've been pouring on it for years and years. Here's the part that has nothing to do with how your lawn looks, and everything to do with where that Scott's bag actually goes once it rains. Synthetic nitrogen doesn't stay put. Push more into the soil than the grass can absorb, which happens almost every application, and the excess washes off with the next heavy rain, straight into storm drains, streams, and eventually rivers and lakes downstream. The EPA has tracked this for decades. It's one of the leading causes of algae blooms that choke oxygen out of waterways, killing fish by the thousands, sometimes shutting down entire lakes for swimming for weeks at a time. None of that happens with a compost top dressing. Organic matter releases nutrients slowly, exactly at the pace roots can use them, so there's nothing left over to wash away. The lawn keeps what it needs. The watershed downstream never sees the difference because there isn't one to see. There's a financial version of the same story too. A homeowner spending on Scott's twice a year for 10 straight years will spend more than switching to compost top dressing for the rest of their life combined, because compost costs pennies compared to a name brand bag. And after the first 2 years, most lawns need less of it, not more. A few honest questions before you try this yourself. Does it work on every grass type? Mostly yes, though warm season grasses respond a little slower than cool season ones since their root systems rebuild on a different clock. Does it work during a drought? Better than Scott's does actually, because that same soil structure holds water longer between rains, which is the entire point Fukuoka spent 5 years proving on a hillside with barely any irrigation at all. Is it safe with kids and pets on the lawn immediately? Compost carries none of the keep-off for 24 to 48 hours, warning that comes printed on every bag of synthetic fertilizer, because there's no chemical residue sitting on the blades to avoid. And if your HOA requires a certain look, this produces a fuller, more even lawn over time, not a patchier one, so it tends to pass inspection more easily, not less. And how long before you actually see a difference? Most people notice softer, springier ground within about 6 weeks, though the full transformation, the kind that makes a screwdriver sink in easily, usually takes 1 full season, not 1 weekend. So the next time that same green Scott's bag comes out of the garage on schedule, remember there's a quieter method sitting in plain sight since 1975, proven on a hillside everyone else had already given up on, that never needed a spring and fall refill from Scott's to keep working. So tell me, when did your lawn actually start struggling? Right after a hot summer, or right after you stopped fertilizing for a season? And if you've tried top dressing with compost yourself, what changed first, the color or the way the ground felt underfoot? Drop it in the comments.